for being here today. And moreover, I want to thank you for giving me some authority relative to you for the next 18 minutes or so. And by that I mean just the way we are positioned here gives me control relative to you. I stand, you're sitting. I can move around, I could even dance. You are constrained. I can see only some of you, not all of you, and yet you're positioned in a way to have a great view of the stage. In a sense, the way we are configured gives me deference from you. Now, you might be saying that's a bit of an extreme interpretation of how we all came to be. You didn't get to choose those seats, right? And that may be true. But did you question this arrangement? Did you say to your neighbor or friend, why are we like this? This doesn't seem really fair. Or instead, did you try to get a seat as close as you could to a good view, even if that meant you were farther away from the exit than you wanted to be or less comfortable than you wanted to be, right? So much what we think of as natural, the way we're all configured here today, is what we call socially constructed. That's important to recognize because in any social construction, there are going to be winners and there are going to be losers. Right now, arguably, I am winning. I get to share my views with you, a very top-down, one-way platform, right? And I come across, at least in my own mind, as infallible. You also could be losing. Are you getting as much out of this event than if we were configured differently, right? You could imagine other kinds of ways of setting this up. I could be on a stage in the middle and all of you in a circle around. I would have to engage you better. The lights could be more on. If nothing else, right, you could be engaging one another through facial expressions or something else. Right now, it's more passive, right, not active or interactive for you. Would you learn as much as you possibly could if we had a different kind of arrangement? I don't know, right? But the point is, much of what we take to be as common sense could be wrong. Instead, we should approach our day-to-day lives and how we've organized them with a sociological imagination. That means that we should see our behaviors and our beliefs less as our volition and our agency, and instead shaped by cultural, economic, political, and other forces that have historical grounding, right? And great magnitude. Our job is to uncover what are those forces? How do they work? How do we resist? How did that historical grounding come to be? If I take out my keys and I let go, what do you think will happen? Will drop on the floor? All right. You're an educated audience. You knew that. Just as there are physical laws that govern our physical world, there are social laws that govern our social world. Our job is to uncover what those laws are. And we need to do so we can make our institutions, whether that's the media, family, politics, education, religion, more equitable and more democratic. I want to elaborate on the power of institutions in shaping behavior by referring to 3 different cases. And I chose these cases because each one of them is arguably behavior that we'll find odd and probably more so problematic, worrisome. And I want to explain, using these stereotypes, right, that they may be no more odd than coming together in a crowded auditorium, sitting next to strangers, and listening to someone speak whatever they want from a stage. As stereotypes, it's important to keep in mind that these do not really demonstrate much. They're not going to be significant of many people. Okay, but they live large in our cultural imagination, so we should unpack what's behind them. The first one is called the Code of the Streets, and it refers to a sociologist who studied African Americans in inner city Philadelphia many years ago. And he found among a small section of these youth that they would engage in violence as a way of earning respect. Okay? So they almost invited violence. They also would wear, nice clothing, expensive jewelry, other demonstrations of their wealth through their cars or other kinds of symbols, right? And again, these are areas where most families are working families, okay, where kids, contrary to popular belief, care a lot about school, work very hard in school. Right? But we still found some kind of behaviors of this sort, right? So why? And as he studied them, he began to realize that they behaved this way because they were responding to the lack of institutional support that many of us take for granted. If you're in an environment where the police or criminal justice systems do not seem to protect you, then you have to come up with your own ways of protecting yourself, your own way of adjudicating what's right, what's wrong. If you have an education system that's underfunded, and even if it was really well funded, there's a very limited job market in these neighborhoods, then you get a lot of status by being able to demonstrate that in these kind of conditions, I can accumulate resources, I can accumulate some money, right? So the lack of institutional support leads to certain kinds of behaviors. It's the same reasons why the Black Panthers many years ago in certain cities would construct health clinics. The idea being the healthcare system is not taking care of our residents. We have to find ways of taking care of ourselves. From that point of view, what these youth could be doing could be seen as an act of resistance, right? If nothing else, it makes a lot more sense when we think of it outside of a purely cultural, right, or family narrative and a more sociological one. The second case refers to this pursuit of what I call hyper-education among certain Asian American families. That is the pursuit of school outside of school, right? So you may have heard that, for instance, Indian American youth keep winning spelling bee after spelling bee, right? I'm here as an Indian American to tell you that that's not the case for all of us. Or you may have heard of other Asian Americans doing well in certain kinds of fields, math and science, and they pursue education outside of school, some of them quite a bit. So much so that schools and their neighbors are getting really worried. Rather than applaud these activities, they're seen as the behaviors of tiger parents, right, who are pushing too much pressure on their kids. And that's hurting the education for everybody in the space, in the neighborhoods, right? Schools are clamping down on this. There's even a quote-unquote new white flight as white families try to leave areas that are seen as too intense in this way. So why do these families perform such a kind of foreign kind of parenthood? And if we think about it, it's not that foreign at all. Lots of parents, especially middle-class, upper-class parents, engage in overscheduling their kids, right? Club sports is a multi-million-dollar industry for young kids, right, where it wasn't 15 years ago. So whether I'm educating my kid after school or putting them in lots of soccer, either way, I'm still making them overscheduled and over-organized. These parents like more assessment and more testing. How strange is that? We have a school system where assessment and testing is baked into it through No Child Left Behind or other kinds of legislation. So what these families are doing may seem actually they're fitting in, not sticking out. But of course, we do see a difference between what these families are doing and others. And if you talk to them like I have, you realize that as immigrants, they're just trying to make their kids as best equipped for the future as they can. You've all heard of the old adage, it's not what you know, it's who you know. But if you don't know that many people, because you didn't go to college here and have those networks, there's no sorority or fraternity you can call up. Your parents aren't from here, and therefore they can't use their connections. Then you better know a lot to compensate for that. And that's what these parents are doing. Let's give our kids lots of knowledge to compensate for a labor market that often uses social connections, social capital, right, as a gauge. They look around at the sports arenas and see these are racially white and black spaces. We may not fit in. So we're not going to invest our time and energies after school in those activities. Using a sociological imagination, we realize that what these families are doing makes a lot of sense. It's hard to argue. The third case has to do with debutante balls. These are lavish parties that certain upper-class white families put on for their youth as they are kind of growing into adulthood. These are families who belong to country clubs, on the board of charities and other nonprofits, right? They may have second or third homes. And what's interesting is that as those scholars who have talked to them, they realize that these parents actually may not be that excited by these parties. They're not that committed to them personally. So why do they spend tens of thousands of dollars? There's no religious conviction. There's no personal conviction. And if you talk to them, you realize what they're trying to do is make sure that their kids have what it takes for them to maintain or advance in their social standing as they go forward. It's not enough to have an income and a profession and a zip code. You have to make sure that you are known within a tight network of people, right, and appreciated as one of them. That way, you have more access to jobs, marriages, whatever else it might be that governs our life chances, right? So the question really isn't, how do they afford such parties? Why do they do so? But instead, how can you afford not to do this if so much of your children's future generational opportunities are at stake, right? Again, these are all three cultural stereotypes. White families are no more likely to do debutante balls than Indian Americans are to win spelling bees. But because they live in our cultural imagination, and because these are often behaviors we might critique, it's important to understand how they came to be, how they make sense. All right? We need to move past the moral and essentialist judgments we make about group behaviors. We need to realize that so much of what we see is a product, or at least facilitated by, our social institutions, whether we like those behaviors or we don't, right? If we want kids after school to do less testing and assessment, then maybe we should ask why we have a school system that applauds and requires those exact things. If we want kids not to engage in violence as a mean for self-protection, right? That is to say, if I engage in violence and I protect myself, and that encourages me to want to do more violence in order to demonstrate more protection. If we don't like that, then we have to ask, why do we have a police or criminal justice system that might not be treating everybody equitably to the best of their abilities, right? We're not trying to excuse any behaviors. We're trying to explain them. And what's more, as I said before, in any social institution, there are winners and there are losers. The same thing applies to what we've just been discussing. The institutions that might not be serving others well probably are serving certain people very well, right? Some of us get our power and authority from being in exclusive spaces, right? Private, exclusive spaces that keep others out. Those could be country clubs. Those could be elite educational institutions. Our gain requires someone else to lose. Our school funding is a zero-sum game. For some public schools to be funded adequately or even well, others are going to be underfunded. If we appreciate certain kinds of behaviors in some groups and criticize those of others, we have to understand they're all connected. Okay? We give ourselves the benefit of the doubt all the time. We rationalize, we justify our behaviors, even sitting here today, right? It makes sense why we do what we do, given our constraints, given where we came from, right? We need to move past individual assessments and recognize the social conditions that have created opportunities and created constraints. It's no more natural for us to be sitting here, right? Closed up next to total strangers in a dark room, thinking we're the enlightened ones, right, than it is for other things that we've discussed. Okay? Hopefully you understand that moralistic and essentialist judgments, right, need to be tempered with the sociological imagination, right? You're not programmed to sit in the dark, hopefully to applaud when the speaker is done. You recognize your social constraints, and we should offer the same analysis to others. Thank you very much.